Caroline Dowd-Higgins. Thanks for listening to Your Working Life, my podcast series featuring thought leaders in the career and personal growth arena. I know that you spend a significant portion of your life at work, so I'm here to help and provide you with tools, inspiration, and resources so you can enjoy your career and love your life. And my special guest today is Mr. Geoffrey Tumlin. Geoffrey, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you on.
Thanks, Caroline. It's a privilege to be talking with you today.
Well, let me tell our audience a little bit about you, and then we're going to dive into a fascinating conversation. Geoffrey Tumlin is the CEO of Mouthpeace Consulting, LLC, an organizational development company. He's the founder and board chair of Critical Skills Nonprofit, a 501c3 public charity dedicated to providing communication and leadership skills training to chronically underserved populations. And he's also the author of the extraordinary book, Stop Talking, Start Communicating, Counterintuitive Secrets to Success in Business and in Life. And Geoffrey's scholarly writing on communication and leadership has appeared in journals, newspapers, and textbooks around the globe. He's taught thousands of people communication and leadership, and he has consulted with some of the most prestigious organizations in the world. And Geoffrey's living in Austin, Texas. So Geoffrey, thank you so much for being with me today. And let's dive right in and start talking about your book. Stop talking, start communicating. So tell me more. How did this all come to pass?
Well, it came because I was spending a lot of time studying communication en route to completing a PhD, and it was happening at the same time that the digital communication revolution was changing how we communicate with each other. And of all of the remarkable advances of the digital revolution, I started to become concerned that we were losing touch with some of our more difficult and more challenging communication skills.
Yeah, I believe it. I absolutely believe it. So that was the beginning of the book journey. So let's learn a little bit more about that. In the book, you talk about multitasking, right? And most people think that multitasking helps them get more accomplished. But we know that the new research shows that it's the exact opposite. And you note in your book that it can be especially damaging to our relationships. So talk to me about that as far as the book and communicating.
Right. Well, there's a lot that we still don't know about what happens when people interact, but some things in terms of multitasking are becoming quite clear. And one kind of finding that keeps repeating itself is that you're going to experience a cognitive degradation, or in more pedestrian terms, a performance decline whenever you're doing more than one difficult cognitive task at a time. And so we can't stack a lot of hard things. I can walk and chew gum because both of those are kind of on autopilot. But the thing about our communication, Caroline, is whenever we put it on autopilot, we get into terrible trouble because it only takes a second to cause hours worth of communication damage. That's part of communication's fundamental asymmetry. So there's a simple problem with multitasking when it comes to communication, which is, as what I'm trying to do gets more difficult, I require more and more focus and attention. Unfortunately, it's focus and attention that are under some of the gravest assaults every day in our digital and kind of hyper communicating environment.
Yeah, don't you agree that we're somewhat overstimulated in this day and age with technology and devices and all of these outside and extraneous things? I'm not saying that they're bad, but I'm saying it can be overstimulating, right? It's not nearly as simple as it was in years past. And I think one of the results in my perception is that people have very short attention spans.
Right. Yeah. there. So let me say two things. The first is, like you, I also don't, I am quick to emphasize all of the wonderful and remarkable things and advances that we've been given as a part of the digital revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that we can connect with people virtually anytime, any place, anywhere, it's remarkable and it's awesome. Separately, there are side effects that I think we're becoming aware of. And you mentioned one, which is hyperstimulated. There was stunning research recently that showed that a majority of participants in a research study, and actually there were differences between men and women. The women were less likely to do this than the men, but the men were more likely than women to do this. But what this thing is when given the choice of sitting alone with their thoughts, they would prefer to shock themselves, give themselves electric shots
Wow.
instead of sitting alone with their thoughts. And it
My
was
goodness.
really a quite remarkable research project that came out just a few months ago. And it speaks a little bit to your point of one of the weird quirks of the digital age is that we are led to believe that there's something better just a click away, when in fact, all of the sages since time immemorial have told us throughout the ages, this moment is really all that we have, and how to figure out how to make the most of this moment instead of always thinking that just if I click on this thing or read this email or whatever it is, there's something better waiting just behind this mouse click.
Fascinating. So, Geoffrey, one of the big takeaways for me in your book was how we can start having focused conversations again. Can you explain that to the listening audience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of what I'm recommending is you have to be simple in order to be complex. And so in communication, there's four things that people really need to be able to do. They need to be able to resolve conflict. That's one. They need to be able to persuade other people. That's a second. They need to be able to argue sensibly. That's a third. And the fourth is that they need to be able to comfort someone or deliver social support in real time. And so those four communication behaviors or skills, if you will, are actually very difficult to pull off in real time, in face-to-face interactions, and they're skills that degrade if we don't keep up with them over time. That's what I'm largely concerned about, is that because we're distracted and because there are so many inputs, because when I sit down, as you alluded to a few minutes ago in our conversation, you said, look, it seemed like a lot simpler many years ago, and it was. When I first started working 15, 20 years ago, I might have had 8 or 9 different kinds of interactions in a day. But now I get triple that amount in my inbox before I wake up.
Exactly.
And so I'm having a much greater volume of conversations. And to manage the load, our species, humans, we're a shortcutting species. And so to manage the load, I've taken shortcuts, I've used the new tools at my disposal, and increasingly, day to day, I'm choosing to interact with people in the easiest and most expedient methods possible. In the meantime, what gets degraded are those 4 core skills that I mentioned. My ability to persuade somebody on my feet, face to face. My ability to argue sensibly without resorting to ad hominem attack. my ability to resolve a dispute between two important people I'm working on a project with, and my ability to turn to a friend who's just lost his father and comfort him right now, real time, when he needs it the most. Those things, those core skills are eroding from lack of use. But in the meantime, Caroline, I've never been better at sending a text message, and you ought to see how good I am at sorting through my inbox. And
Yeah.
that's the disconnect that I'm the most concerned about and that I address in my book, is that the most we build our lives one conversation at a time. The grand societal experiment we're running is what happens when the overwhelming majority of those interactions are quick and are expedient.
Mm. Jeffrey, I was so struck in your book about how you talked about why it's important that we become better listeners. And I so value in professionals, family members, you name it, anybody that I come in contact with, the art of active listening, because I think it's a dying art. So tell me, what's your take on listening and why we need to become better listeners?
My take on listening is that, like you suggested, it's indispensable to communication, but it's suffering because most of what I do today is I send stuff out.
Mm.
And it's what I would call I-based. It derived from me, people like me in my profession, where we study human communication and we read the research and we want to know, what does the science say about how people interact. We've been struggling for hundreds of years to try to get people to move away from I based to more we based, because until you're thinking of communication as not what I want to say, but the thing that I say, the thing that you say, and how we both make meaning of it, until you move from I based to we based, you're not communicating. You're just talking. And that's the title of my book refers back to that, where it's stop talking, start communicating. And it's a reminder of that timeless battle that not just people like me who study communication, but all of us fight every day to get out of the I a little bit more often and try to take things and experience what the other person is saying, take their perspective into account, and have that be the basis for how we're communicating and how we're making meaning together. And so, more, I wish that we would have named the thing a we phone instead of an iPhone, but that's not the way that the history worked out. And so,
Yeah.
it's still incumbent on everyone, all of us, to try to carve out the time. And as you know, the most amazing thing happens when you stop and listen to someone else, is you learn remarkable things about,
Mm-hmm.
not about trivial people, about the most important
Right.
people in your life. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's the indispensable communication skill is listening, or said slightly differently, the difference between good and great communicators is great communicators consistently take the other person's perspective into account.
Okay, I so appreciate that. And now my follow-up to that, and I value those we-based communications as well. So that makes sense to me. And we're in a social media dominated time, right? There seems to be a compulsion to try to get our point of view across, right? I'm going to share, I'm going to tweet, I'm going to put my information out into the universe. How is that corroding the interactions that we have with other people?
Yeah, and so that's a great question, and I'm not suggesting that anyone throw away any tool for connecting with another human, whether that's Facebook or Twitter, it's social media, it's email. I think we should use all of the tools. And what I'm zeroed in on the most is the more difficult communication skills, like the ones that I've mentioned. Can you still do those effectively face to face? That's my first question. And then my second question is your communication, the interactions you're having, are they helping you have more of the life that you want, or are they getting in the way of you having the life that you want?
Ah, very
And
nice. Yeah.
and it's I know no other way than for us, all of us, to be running 330 million individual experiments on how best to use these remarkable digital communication tools to have more of the kinds of interactions that we want. And I'm only trying to sound a warning sign about a potential collateral damage of important, more difficult skills eroding. I think that my concern is that it's not that we're experiencing something like what happened when the TV was introduced and everybody thought, oh no, we're going to go to you know where in a handbasket and everything is going to be terrible. And it didn't happen. And so I don't think that my smartphone and social media and my email, I don't think that that's the same argument as TV. The argument that I'm concerned about is that it's actually like fast food.
Mm.
And when fast food first came out, it sounded pretty good. It was cheap, it was pretty easy, and it sure freed up a lot of time, only to find out 20 or 30 years later that there were some very significant downstream consequences
Right.
to the large adoption of fast food throughout society. And it's balance. I had to indulge in a frosty. I had a frosty from Wendy's and a waffle cone yesterday, and it won't kill me to do that yesterday,
Right.
but it might yesterday, the day
Every
before,
day.
the day, and so forth. So, it balance,
Moderation. Yeah.
individual experimentation, and a very, very, just as I always keep an eye now. I'm getting old enough where I need to watch my cholesterol. I need to
Sure.
watch this, my that.
Yeah.
And all I'm saying is we should do the same thing for communication. Watch your arguing, watch your persuasion, watch your social support, and watch your conflict resolution, just like they're your cholesterol, and see if you're able to effectively deploy those more difficult skills, because that's going to be the canaries. Those are the four canaries in the coal mine,
Right.
that
Right.
your difficult skills are getting rusty while you're becoming the greatest at sending emoticons through your text message.
I appreciate that because what you're saying is we need to do a self-check, a self-audit every now and then. Just as one watches what they eat and how they exercise and move through life, we need to think about how we communicate. So thank you for giving us that accountability. Let's think positively, though. What are the benefits that we'll see when we do make a commitment to listening and paying attention to others, for example?
Oh, that's easy. It'll change your life. I mean, that's I in I mean that with not a touch of glibness. I mean,
Okay.
so people like me who are true believers in the power of human interaction, what we say is that if you have good communication, then you're going to have good core relationships. And when your core relationships are intact, you're going to have much more of the life that you want. And there are other derivations of our communication that play into this. Like, for example, when you do listen more, you learn a ton about your environment, and that that leads to a virtuous cycle in how you interact with the people closest to you on a daily basis. For example, the more you take the other person's perspectives, the easier it usually is to find overlapping interests. And when you can find that, all of a sudden, persuasion and argumentation get easier by a factor of 10. For a
Wow.
third and final example in this set, the thing about communication is I don't have to change much. I never need to worry about changing you directly. So if you said, Jeff, I want you to change Caroline, I don't need to worry about changing Caroline, which is good because I won't. You'll fail if you try to change someone directly. But I can change fundamentally our relationship just by changing how I communicate with you.
Ah.
And so there's a stunning amount of influence we have in the ways that we communicate with other people, period. Second sentence. Usually we give most of that influence away by allowing ourselves the indulgence of reacting to something emotionally, which means that fundamentally we're often running, chasing the least if there's two of us in an interaction and you do something that upsets me, all of a sudden I react to that, and now there's two of us. And so I've just taken the lead from the person least likely to be making good decisions and doubled down on that in the conversation instead of holding on to all of the influence that I have to exert a positive force on my interactions. You may know this because we've talked in this conversation a bunch about listening, and because as part of your profession, you're an expert listener, and I can tell from the way that you've asked these questions that you're a fantastic questioner as well. So you may already know this one secret, which is when you let conversations come to you more often, very amazing things happen, which I'll call just simply connection, an authentic human connection. And now go all the way back to the very first thing that we talked about, the very first question you asked me about focus and distraction and how that's harming relationships. And that connection between two people, we're learning a lot more about the science behind that. And it appears that there's a ton of positive, not only physiological, but emotional benefits for two people when they get face to face and when they make an authentic connection. A lot of interpersonal and physiological good flows from that. And so that's another reason that I'm concerned that as we spend increasing amounts of our times behind screens and not face to face, that we're missing some of those types of very supportive connections.
So, Geoffrey, what I find fascinating, you mentioned in the book that you encourage people to stick with awkward conversations. Now, we've all been in that scenario where conversation isn't free flowing and might be a little stilted. What does one do to make the most of that interaction?
Well, you have already hit upon the solution, which is you want to live with the awkwardness just a little bit and relax. And so that voice in your head telling you about how terrible things are going, it's way overblowing the situation.
Okay.
And so in general, most awkwardness works its way out of a conversation after a few turns of a conversation or a few seconds as people find a particular rhythm and conversational matching takes hold. And so we've all been in, and for many of us, for many people in general, initial interactions when we're first meeting someone and greeting them, they're extremely awkward. And if your listeners only take one small snippet from our conversation, they can employ a 10-second rule. And in the first 10 seconds of any interaction, just relax. Don't worry about anything that happens. Don't worry if it gets off to a rough start. It will smooth out. Resist that voice in your head telling you how terrible everything's going. It's talking way too much. And keep pushing your way through. The matching will take hold and you'll be okay.
Well, that's comforting. So really just breathe through it and trust. I like that. That's brilliant.
Yeah, because there's not another way.
Right.
Both parties are thinking the same thing. Oh
Mm.
my goodness, this is going terrible. And the good news is it only takes one of the two to stop the cycle and say, you know what, it's not that bad. We're going to be fine.
That's
I
great.
know he just called me by the wrong name. I know that I just said good afternoon and it's really 7:30 in the morning. You know,
Right. It's all
we're
good.
gonna we're gonna be all right.
So, Geoffrey, you do some incredible work with organization level communication assessments. I would love to hear more about that.
Oh, great. Thanks for asking. I've had a lot of very enjoyable work recently helping organizations map the actual communication flows. And so we'll go into an organization and it's not very painful. We use an online assessment. It takes about 15 minutes and everybody fills it out and we learn two things. We learn where the actual information is flowing and where it's bottlenecked to include the most important communication influencers in the formal leadership network and in the informal leadership network. And then separately, we ask a series of questions about what people think are the core values of the organization. And then we're returned in real time with two things: a map of information flows across the whole organization and a person by person accounting, which we then of course roll up into work teams and divisions and units and so forth, of what people believe are the actual core values of the organization. So you can quickly see this part of the organization over here, the third shift at this one particular plant, they're disconnected from the rest of the information flow. They're kind of out on their own, doing their own thing. And by the way, they think that the organization is all about embracing change and trying the next new thing, whereas the other four plants in your organization think that service quality is the most important, followed by continuity of client relationships or what have you. And so it's a very nice way of looking at getting a roadmap of how information actually moves throughout the organization and what people actually think are the core values or the culture of your organization. And then obviously we use all this data to help executive teams do their leadership and strategic initiative planning, because now once you have the lay of the land, you know, okay, I have to go to this plant and figure out why they're disconnected. I have to include them here. Here's my most important formal influencers. Here's the most important informal. And I need to make sure that they're on board with the new change initiative and so forth.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for that. So, Geoffrey, let's boil it down to one thing, right? If someone listening wants to get started today to improve the way they communicate, what would be your takeaway for them today? What's your wisdom?
Well, I think that I'm going to borrow some of the insight that I heard in some of your questions. And I'm going to say the one thing that I would recommend that they take away, and this is partially influenced by the insights of Caroline as well, is go out of your way to learn and listen from the other person. And if you start from thinking of communication not as something that I'm doing to another person or that I'm sending through a particular channel, but as a moment where we are trying to create a connection together. I'm willing to go out on a limb and say that that change of mindset will lead to more of the kind of life that you want.
Excellent. Geoffrey, that is terrific and inspiring. And I must say, as someone who read your book, Stop Talking, Start Communicating, I would highly recommend it to all of our listeners and then some. So tell us how we can buy your book and how we can follow you online.
My book is available through all online retailers as well as in most physical bookstores.
Mhm.
You can also reach me and learn about the book through my website, which is tumlin.com, TUMLIN.com.
Great. And you're also on Facebook and Twitter, so it's important for people to look at you. And I'm going to share your Twitter handle, which is Mouthpiece CO, so people can find you there. And Mouthpiece Consulting is where they can find you on Facebook. Is that correct?
Yep, that's exactly right. And I love connecting with your listeners in any of the channels that they find most enjoyable and that they like using.
Excellent. Geoffrey Tumlin, I learned so much from you today. I thank you for sharing your wisdom and expertise about your incredible work and your book, Stop Talking, Start Communicating. And I wish you great success. And I hope that our professional paths cross again soon.
So do I, Caroline. Thanks for the privilege of talking with you. You're a fantastic interviewer.
Well, thank you, my dear. Take good care and be well.
You too.
And I want to thank our listeners for tuning into Your Working Life, where my goal is to help you design your career destiny so it doesn't happen by default. True career and life satisfaction is really possible, and it's time to embrace what you love doing so you can do more of it. I'm Caroline Dowd-Higgins. Take good care.